Hey everybody, so in this video I just want to talk about how many journals to have and whether you should have one journal for everything where you combine all your different interests and uses, or should you have a different type of journal for all the different things that you're doing. Like many things, if you know me, you probably realize I like the concept of thinking of things on a continuum or a spectrum, and that is also the case with this question about journaling. So on one end of the spectrum would be to have one giant journal where you put all of your writing about emotional stuff or doing your other types of self-awareness journaling practices, and combine all of your drawing and your sketching, your sketch noting if you do that, or other note-taking forms for classes or formal things. And if you do nature journaling, doing that in there also. So that would be one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be to have like 10 different journals, little ones, big ones, in between ones, and a specific one for each thing you're doing. So for me, for example, when I was doing archery, for a while I considered, should I have a journal just for my archery? Or should I have a journal for my home brewing and fermentation? Or a journal for exercise and tracking? Should I have a separate journal for animal tracking and stuff like that? And so I've gone back and forth quite a bit with this, and you can go crazy trying to find the best system. So partly it's up to you to figure out what works for you, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of my practices. So, and give you an idea of what some of the pros and cons are. So I have tried making separate journals, and I'll give you an example of some of those, but I have bought these cheaper type of sketchbooks, like pretty basic with paper that's just pretty much made for drawing and not accepting wet media. And I have used these a lot for classes where I know I will be doing a fair amount of drawing. Like this was for a 3D design class, and we did a fair amount of drawing and visual problem solving, but it was also a lot of really sketchy stuff or quick note taking. And one thing in this whole consideration is if you're doing just a lot of writing, you don't need fancy thick paper for that, because that's sort of a waste. So in this case, this journal made sense because I was filling lots of pages with just notes and writing like this, and I didn't want to use very expensive quality paper for that. The downside is if this is the only journal that you have in your backpack or your nature journal kit, and that's fine when you're in class and taking notes, but then say you go outside and you see an amazing tree and you want a nature journal about it. Well, that happened to me, and you can see here I was super excited about this Araucaria tree and started to nature journal it, and the only sketchbook I had with me was this one, and this paper just wasn't really the greatest for holding up to the watercolor. I was still able to nature journal, and I do believe in pushing the paper beyond its ability is preferable than buying paper that is overbuilt for what you're trying to do. Nevertheless, this was not ideal, and I kind of wish I could have had this page in with the rest of my nature journal stuff. So you can see there in this example how one of the pros and the cons of having separate journals. Now, one of the cons of having everything in the same journal is that well, let's start with the pros. So if you have just one journal, and this is kind of how I do it now, I have one main journal, and in this journal I do see even some note-taking stuff. This is some note-taking stuff from work, and I also have my nature journaling stuff is in here too. You can see that here, and then also just my morning journaling practices that you can see there. And so the great thing is that all of that is in this one journal. It's really easy where I store all of my journals over here. See right there, they all look good, they all are the same kind of journal. It's very familiar. I just stick this into my bag and go, and I can do, if I'm traveling or whatever, I can do all my journaling in that one book. So that's one of the main pros. Now, searchability is always a tricky thing with journaling. That's one of the disadvantages of analog compared to digital. but that's something I'm really curious about. If anyone out there has cool ideas about searchability, would love to geek out a little bit more on that. But searchability, when you have your archery stuff, your nature stuff, your tracking stuff, classes, work, all of your personal, like emotional and metacognitive stuff all in one journal, it could be hard if you want to search because the topics are all mixed together. There's definitely a lot of potential with sticky notes, and all of you know that I love sticky notes, so that's one thing. And one of the downsides also is, let me go back to that page where I had notes from work. If you are using, this is pretty nice paper that's good for watercolor, and you can see here I spent 2 pages just note-taking in graphite. That is probably not the best use for this quality Stillman and Burn paper. However, that's something that you have to take in consideration when you're using one book. I'm going to show a couple other of my journals where I've tried to separate things. Another, going back to the system on the spectrum where you separate things, this is that book I was showing earlier that's a poorer quality sketchbook, not as good a paper. I was using this, like I said, for a little bit of nature journaling, but mostly for note-taking for a 3D design class. So the problem with this and having a lot of separate journals, say you finish that class and you still have a bunch of pages left in your journal, you often end up with these sketchbooks or journals that were too specialized, and then you end up not filling them because you stopped practicing that thing or whatever. And I'm really trying to move away from leaving journals like this that are partially full. That's part of why I really like this omni journaling method, where it's just like everything is in this book and I fill every single page. You know, even you guys know that I fill the front cover. I don't even leave that blank. So you can see here, this is the front stock of the book, and I just filling every single page of this journal and not leaving anything blank. And that's how I'm doing it now, really moving away from the specialized journals with lots of empty pages. For a while I was using these smaller moleskins, and I actually was using this, for example, for this I was taking this class on how to build primitive traps, and I was using it to draw in the branches and stuff like that. But at the same time, this was small and easy to carry for a class like that that's out in the field. But then when it came to sort of more of the emotional stuff, or you know, I want to do some bigger compositions, this feels a little bit cramped in here. I personally, especially because I have hand problems, writing a lot on small paper like this or drawing a lot on small paper is very limiting. I also did not realize it when I purchased this, but this appears to be non-archival paper, and I'm kind of disappointed about that. There's some major deterioration in the colors on some of these pages. But just to show you here, this is a perfect example of combining everything into one journal. I have this very whimsical drawing over here on this side, and then over here I have this schematic for a poultry orchard polyculture system. And so where I'm at right now is I basically have that one big journal where I do most of my nature journaling and my more like emotional journaling stuff. Then I have a small journal that when I'm traveling, I take this and I can use it on the bus or on the plane, or if I'm out in the field in like really poor conditions, like if I'm tracking. You can see I have some tracking journaling in here. I can use this because it's easy to fit into my pocket. I'm not too worried if it gets a little bit wet or messed up. So I have that, and then I have like one cheaper sketchbook that I use for sketchnoting. And you can see here, I'm not super confident in my own sketchnoting, and so in this case I'm sketchnoting, and I don't necessarily, I don't want to be too precious about my sketchnoting, so I have a cheaper book that I can take to conferences and things like that. And worst case scenario, I'm carrying 2 different journals, so that's not too bad with the journals that I use. That's not too heavy in my my pack, and then I'll have this thing in my pocket and I'm good to go. So I hope that helps you. Please like below if you got something out of this video, or make a comment down below about how you use different journals, whether you prefer to put everything into one journal or you have separate journals for everything from baking to exercise. And if you're super excited about your journaling practice or feel like you have something very unusual or special that you want to share, let me know, because I've been interviewing people who have interesting journaling practices, and you've probably seen some of those interviews already. All right, we'll keep journaling, and see you next time. Bye.